Welcome to the Power Trends podcast, produced by the New York Independent System Operator, where we discuss energy planning, public policy, and other issues affecting New York's power grid.
Hello and welcome to the Power Trends podcast. I'm Kevin Lanahan, Vice President, External Affairs, Corporate Communications at the New York Independent System Operator. This is episode number 38. And today we welcome back Rich Dewey, President and CEO of the NYISO, to the podcast. It's hard to imagine there have been 38 of these, so nearly 6 years ago. You were the first guest on the first podcast. It was just days after the CLCPA was signed into law. It was only a couple months after you were installed as President and CEO.
Feels like yesterday.
It's hard to imagine that all that time has gone by. The energy landscape was about to be altered significantly with the signing of the CLCPA. We couldn't have anticipated or predicted a pandemic, sequestering the control room operators to keep them safe. And now a new administration in Washington, D.C. will also change things.
Well, with certainty, we've seen a lot of change, but one of the things that has not changed through the entire course of this time period has been our steadfast commitment to reliability of the power system and everything that we need to do to ensure that we can keep power flowing for New Yorkers. It's just so essential to our health, safety, really an economy of New York.
And that's a good segue into what we want to cover today. Your annual State of the Grid address, we've come to call it, is next week at the management committee meeting every year. You address the market participants and stakeholders, and really by that extension, consumers, policymakers, as to what your agenda is and priorities for the year ahead, items and projects we need to focus on to evolve and support the markets, and as you say, system reliability. But before we get into that, maybe you can give us an idea of what you think some of the major successes were the last 12 months or so.
Sure. I mean, some of the successes that we've enjoyed has been the evolution of our markets that enable us to send the right kind of signals so that we get the most reliable set of resources on the electric system. And we can do so at the most cost-effective and efficient means for consumers. When you look at the changes that are taking place on the power grid, a number of forces are leading to shrinking reliability margins. And reliability margins is really that safety net that we have from day to day and hour to hour to maintain a reliable electric system. We've seen a lot of retirements of the legacy power plants across New York State. And we've also seen a remarkable uptick in demand or load. Some of that is driven by the policies of New York State, the electrification of the building sector and the transportation sector, but also a fantastic news story of economic development really across New York State, where we've started to see significant additions with respect to factories, data centers, and planning for that load growth, which translates into job growth and expansion of the economy, is exciting, but it's also challenging from the standpoint of making sure that we've got a reliable electric system that can meet that demand.
Yeah, you mentioned load growth, chip fab manufacturing facilities that are locating or expanding, data centers. So we're seeing those projects show up in the interconnection work we have to do. And then there's the massive amount of generation that's also proposed in our interconnection queue. I'm guessing that you want to talk about further improvements in the interconnection process for 25, but what we did to improve the process in 24.
Each of these new resources that are so critically important to maintain reliability need to go through a process by which we can study and analyze and really assure that they are connecting to the grid in the most cost-effective and safest manner. We've seen a massive uptick in the number of projects that are coming into the queue, and that's resulted in a significant increase in the amount of workload that we have. One of the things which we've been able to do is increase the number of resources and people that are working on this problem, but also amplifying the communication, the information, and the service that we can provide to these developers so they know that they're going through the process in the most expeditious and cost-effective manner. So it's involved not only bringing resources to bear to help the process go more smoothly, but also improving the process itself, the efficiency of the process, really a process redesign. And we've launched a brand new cluster study which represents the most progressive thought process, not only on the part of our own engineers, and the management from our team, but also collaboration across the industry with the transmission owners and with the developers themselves to make sure that developers that are interconnecting to the grid are getting information when they need it. They can make the most informed decisions. And at the end of the day, we've got the most expeditious and cost-effective process to make sure that they can come onto the power grid safely.
But before we launched that cluster study process with hundreds of proposed projects asking us to evaluate the reliability and the impact on the grid, there was a lot of work that happened working with stakeholders, the transmission owners, the developers themselves, and others to come to terms with and establish that process. That kind of collaboration informed the successes that we had later on in moving those big number of projects through a brand new process.
Yeah, and that collaboration was really necessary. We're talking about an order of magnitude increase in the number of projects that are coming through the interconnection queue. A lot of it had to do with policy-driven renewable generation projects, which are so critical to New York State and the goals of New York State, but also the recognition that we need new sources of energy to meet this exciting new demand that's coming onto the system. So we had to sit down and really look at the processes that we had in place, identify what pieces of those studies and that analysis was critically important to developers so they could make the most informed decision, but also identify those pieces that were so crucial to reliability to make sure that we had the right kind of equipment in place when they were ready to connect, to make sure that we had the right kind of cost assessments and allocations so that the people that were introducing the change were the ones that bared the cost of that, ultimately saving ratepayers and consumers as much money as possible, but also making sure that we can get it done as quickly as we can.
So we've made reforms to front load a lot of the critical technical work so that we can understand earlier on in the process some of the impacts of these projects. But assessing the reliability, there will be improvements and upgrades that the developers are ultimately responsible for. So we keep the system reliable and then can accommodate those other load projects that we were talking about earlier.
That's exactly right. The process is designed so that the organizations or the entities that are creating the new requirements are the ones that bear the cost of that as opposed to consumers. It's also about making sure that we've got information available for developers and presenting that to them at the front end of the process so that they can make the most informed decisions for their investors and that they can locate the new projects at really the interconnection point on the grid that is the most beneficial to reliability and the most beneficial to consumers.
You mentioned reliability margins continue to lessen. That's a concern that's been identified in several planning reports the last several years. We're going to be issuing a comprehensive reliability plan in November, but in terms of the planning function, what else are you thinking?
Well, the planning function is on the cusp of really a reformation of the transmission planning process. This is something that is being spurred by policy initiatives at the national level. A new transmission planning order from the FERC has encouraged, really incentivized all of the regional planning entities to take a long, hard look at the transmission planning process and identify where improvements can be made that would increase not only the capability to do much longer range planning, but also think about some of those uncertainties that we're dealing with for the future and factoring that into the planning process, do more forward-looking scenario development so that we can identify changes, upgrades, proposals to the power system that can not only meet the needs of the known reliability concerns that we have, but also those new scenarios associated with economic development for the future.
That scenario development has become ever more important on the theme of uncertainty and change. We always run that base case in the low and the high demand scenarios, and we're trying to account for things that could happen across a spectrum of possibilities.
That's right. When you think about significant electrification of our economy, not only transportation and buildings, but everything that we do as an economy, the likelihood of when that is going to happen and the pace of change is really uncertain and unknown. And from a power system planning standpoint, we don't have the luxury to wait and see how it's going to play out. We've got to try to anticipate what the pace of that future development is and make sure that we've got agile plans that can react to those changes on the pace and the scale that they happen, and also make sure that we've got the appropriate level of reliability margins in place so we're ready for the uncertainties.
And that part's becoming more complex and complicated. The load forecast becomes more uncertain. In the RNA, we pointed out that we are seeing potential load growth of 1,000, 1,200 megawatts a year as we get into the next decade, driven by some of that high-tech manufacturing and siting of those data centers. Zach Smith, who's been on this podcast a number of times, says those data centers can pop up very quickly. Some of the scenarios going to try and understand that a little sharper.
Absolutely. Economic development is something that is cyclical, but when the opportunity presents itself, these changes can happen quickly on the power system. You mentioned forecasting. One of the other things which is getting increasingly complicated with forecasting is the generation resources, whether it's wind or solar, is dependent, much more dependent on the weather for the overall performance. And when you start thinking about the variability and the uncertainties around weather, we're very accustomed to thinking about the changes to the temperature and how that impacts demand on a day in and day out basis. But now that the generation sources are dependent on the sun and the wind, there's so many different complicating factors associated with getting that forecast right. So we've spent a lot of time and effort thinking about advanced tools, advanced technologies to be able to improve and do a much more accurate job of reflecting that, because it's so important, not only to the planning of the power system, but also the operations.
You mentioned transmission planning and Order 1920 out of FERC, and we've had great success through the public policy transmission process of Segment A, Segment B. Those major projects roughly from Syracuse to Albany and then down through the Hudson Valley into New York. We're going to see Champlain Hudson. Any thoughts around additional transmission investment and how that should go?
In New York, we are really the nation leader in implementing public policy transmission construction. This was a model that was envisioned by the FERC a decade ago, and really New York is the only entity that has been successful in identifying need based on public policy for new transmission, going through the siting and the evaluation process and actually building it.
So probably important to ask you about market design. And there's a proposal to take a look at the capacity market. Walk us through what you're thinking on that project.
New York's markets are recognized nationally as being some of the most innovative and effective wholesale markets in the nation. When you think about the purpose of our markets, it's really about developing the right kind of reliability services located at the right point on the power grid, and also making sure that it's the most cost-effective and efficient for consumers. So the power grid itself is going through a radical transformation, and our markets need to keep pace with that because the types of attributes that are necessary to operate the power grid are changing. And when you think about the change in the energy sources and the capabilities of those resources, having market signals that ensure that we get the right kind of performance at the right price for consumers is so critical. So our markets, we don't sit tight and just rest on our laurels with respect to our market development. We're constantly looking for ways to develop new products, new services to make sure that that price signal is effective in generating the kind of resources that we need and continue to do so in a most cost-effective way for consumers.
When listening to you talk, it's such a difficult equation, and it's the proverbial lining up of the moon, the stars, and the sun. You're talking about type of reliability services you want, and this echoes back to the outlook. Where on the system it makes the most sense to make that specific investment that keeps the system reliable at a cost-effective price. That's really the beauty, the elegance of markets. What I hear you saying is they have performed well, and the capacity market provides that reliability service, has for 25 years. We haven't talked about the silver anniversary of the NYISO, but we probably should. But now, under your leadership, we're going to take a look to make sure that for the next 25 years, we have the right construct in place.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that the capacity market has served us well for 25 years. And it was based on the available technologies, that interconnected set of resources that we had available to us to operate a reliable grid. But as the characteristics of the resources are changing, we need to recognize that the markets themselves need to change, and the capacity market is included within that. So we're going to take a long, hard look at our capacity market. We're going to try to determine and identify if we've got the right set of rules in place. And if we do, and there might just be some small tweaks or tunes that need to happen to that market, that's the approach that we're going to take to continue to deliver value for consumers. But if we do need to make some radical changes, we're not going to be afraid to do that, not only to ensure that developers have revenue adequacy to make the investment that we need, but also that we're going to get the performance out of those resources that are so important to reliability. When you think about markets, it's really markets, plural. We have a capacity market that makes sure that we've got steel in the ground at the appropriate location, and that they're ready to perform when we need them. There's the energy market that makes sure that on a dispatch basis, we are tapping into and scheduling the most cost-effective resources at the right time. Ancillary services are so critical for managing those uncertainties and those contingencies that pop up through the course of the day. So it's really about making sure that all of these markets work well together. That's been our approach ever since markets started 25 years ago.
So you talked about the new technologies we're seeing connecting to the system and the continued dependency on weather as a resource with those new technologies. Thoughts on nuclear, because this state government is now very focused on that technology.
I think we need to maintain an all-in approach to maintaining reliability. Nuclear is a reliable carbon-free source of electricity. The nuclear facilities that we have today on the system have been working very well for decades. As we start thinking about the load growth that we anticipate, we're going to need to bring more resources onto the system. And it would be remiss not to include nuclear in that mix as we think to modernize the electric grid from the standpoint of providing those attributes that are necessary to maintain reliability.
And in the 300 or so projects that are still going through the interconnection process, while we don't see nuclear in there, there's a lot of battery storage. Thoughts around that technology moving forward?
Batteries are a resource that presents a tremendous opportunity to balance the uncertainty of wind and solar from the standpoint of capturing that essentially free fuel source that we get from renewables, but it's not as predictable and reliable. And there are periods of time when we see tremendous variability, whether it's cloud cover that's limiting the solar output or changes that we see in the wind. Having a reliable backstop or a resource that can then fill in and complement those resources, batteries represent a tremendous opportunity. The limitation of batteries is just the duration of the storage. And we're constantly seeing innovation and new chemistries under research that are giving us even longer duration opportunities to backstop and complement those wind and solar resources.
It's going to be another dynamic year. And maybe as a last note, we should just cover, because I know how active you are in extending and securing those collaborative relationships outside of the company with other ISOs, RTOs, state policymakers, federal policymakers, regulators, and then you mentioned the stakeholders and that important process, the governance process. And I'll just give you a second to comment on how important that's going to be in 25 amidst all this change.
We're part of a national system, and the electric system in the US is one of the largest machines that was ever built in the world. So we're continuously dependent on our neighbors, on the power systems that are adjacent to us, and the ability to work collaboratively across the industry is just going to continue to be crucial to our success. And we're part of a much larger ecosystem here than just New York.
All right, shifting just a little bit, you mentioned innovation. So let's talk about the workforce and the team for a minute. Under your leadership, we've made mindful investments in the culture, provided opportunities for employees to develop mentoring, job shadowing, and other programs. But really, you're trying to anticipate the needs of the system with the right minds and the right skills, bringing in new employees. If you can talk about your vision there.
Yeah, at the New York ISO, really, the lifeblood of everything that we do is our employees. And it's just so crucial to be able to attract, retain, and develop the skills of an excited, motivated, impassioned workforce. And that's what we strive for. We've made some outstanding new additions to our workforce. There's a lot of new talent that's entering the organization. I think people are excited about the electricity industry, really impressed with the work that we do here at the New York ISO, how important, both interesting and important the work is. And it's really about making sure that we find that right kind of motivated, committed employee. And then our commitment is really the development of a learning culture and making sure that people have the tools, the capabilities, the opportunities to continue to learn, continue to develop their skills, We have a number of programs that we've implemented to enable that, from a job rotation program to a mentoring program, to really capture the passion and the interests of employees and make them feel really excited about this being a fantastic, wonderful place to work that they can establish their career and hopefully stay for a very long time.
And then there are those other organizations that can bring employees together around common interests that are dear to people's hearts. These are the employee resource groups that are standing up. We have the Women in NYISO WIN network. That's a robust place for all employees really to come together around some industry developments. Maybe talk about some of the ERGs that are getting stood up.
Yeah, I mean, what we've recognized is people want more than just an 8-hour-a-day job and set of assignments that they work on. I mean, it's really important to get job satisfaction, but it's also that spirit of welcoming. People want to feel like we're a family here, and creating those opportunities for individuals that have common interests or maybe come from common backgrounds, and they want to continue to develop those skills, those networks. And it's really about providing the opportunity so that they have a forum, they have some sponsorship, they got some autonomy to be able to do that, and really just create the environment that they can just continue to grow and feel welcome and be part of the team.
So, Rich, your sentiments on 25 years of markets. This was celebrated this at the all hands meeting at the end of the year, 25 years of progress, change, and accomplishments. But your thoughts when you look back on your time here and then the evolution of markets, which was at the time, people really didn't know in 1999 how this was going to go.
In 1999, we were on the cusp of launching really what was a new endeavor, a new industry, a new company. And not everyone thought that it was going to be as successful for as long as we've enjoyed success. I look back on my days. I joined in spring of 2000. The NYISO CEO at the time, Bill Muessler, invited me to join the firm. He said, I don't know what your job's going to be. I don't know what your title's going to be, but I guarantee you we will have fun. And that was enough for me. So, I joined the NYISO. I became part of the team. It was fun. It was a rocky ride. It was a rough go in the early days because everything was uncertain. It was changing so fast. But the hard work, commitment, and really the execution of a dedicated team enabled us to build the system that we have today. And now we're enjoying some of the fruits of those labors. But it continues to be challenging. It continues to be fun. When you think about all the changes that are going on with the power system, with the electric industry, and the need to stay out in front of that, we couldn't be in a better spot right now. And when I look back on 25 years, I can't believe how fast it went by. It went by in a blink.
Anything else, Rich, that we are going to hear from you at the State of the Grid report?
It's really just there is no status quo in this industry anymore. And it's really about the pace of change, which is exciting, but also challenging at the same time. The way that we navigate through these changes and still maintain the most reliable system that we can for New Yorkers is really just continuing to work together. And it's not just the NYISO team and our employees here that need to work so well together. It's everyone across the industry. It's all of our stakeholders. It's everybody that's got a vested interest in the successful development and evolution of the power grid within New York State, which is the lifeblood of the economy for New York State. It's an exciting time to be part of this industry. It's an exciting time to be part of everything that's going on in New York. I couldn't be happier to be part of this, and I couldn't be happier to work with so many impassioned, impressive people, both within our company and within our stakeholder process. So I'm looking forward to 2025. It's going to be a great year.
Well, thanks for spending time with us on Power Trends podcast. I will say that I must have aged in 6 years because somebody on staff said, I looked up the first podcast and I saw the photo where we posted you and Rich recording this and you look like a kid. So I don't know what happened in 6 years, but it's been a pleasure. And I appreciate your confidence in launching the first one of these. And thanks for sharing with us your agenda and thoughts on 2025.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. It's going to be a great year.
Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, the New York Independent System Operator, NYISO for short, is responsible for reliably managing New York's power grid and energy markets and providing independent data to policymakers and the public. For more independent info, please visit the NYISO blog at www.nyiso.com/blog.